Okay, welcome to the Enchanted Village stitch along. Today we are going to start with our 3 baselines on this pattern. So we have this one down here, this one in the middle, and then this one up top. I like to do those first on these villages because it helps kind of anchor everything into place, especially if you're using the sticky paper. It helps anchor your paper down as well so it's not ever slipping around while we're stitching. So we're going to start with the bottom baseline here, and I'm using my needle that has a little bit of a larger eye because we're going to use all 6 strands, and I'm starting with 6 strands of 371, and we're going to do the same stitch technique on all 3 of these baselines. So on this bottom one down here, I am going to show you how to do that. I'll start with just a little straight stitch out. This is back stitch, by the way, but for your starter stitch, you want to just begin with a little tiny straight stitch. And the reason that we do that is because then, as I'm doing my back stitch on this first stitch here, I'm not going to run into that knot that's on the underside of the fabric. Now, after you make that first straight stitch, you're going to come up a short stitch length away, pull through, and then you're going to go back down through that same hole of the previous stitch. And you can continue that all the way across. You'll come up a stitch length away and go back down through that same hole from the previous stitch. Be careful when you're starting off with all 6 strands. Sometimes it can want to get a little bit knotted. So just move with grace, if you will. Just kidding. Move a little slowly when you're coming through the fabric. Sometimes I hold my finger there to help it not tangle. So anyways, we're going to go all the way across like that, and then I'll show you part 2. We're going to turn it into a whipped back stitch. Now once you have stitched that all the way across, you're going to take 1 strand of that shiny gold thread. This is our diamond thread. And you're going to start at one end of the line. It doesn't really matter which one. And we're going to do the whipped back stitch with this. So what I like to do, especially if you have the stick and stitch paper here, is take your non-stitching hand and push up on the other side of the fabric underneath, right where you're going to be angling your needle through. And that just helps you sort of angle that needle up and out away from the fabric and the sticky paper, or if you just traced, it might just be helpful anyways too, just to sort of get it angled. But you're going to kind of shimmy that needle underneath that first stitch and then pull it through from the other side all the way. Now I'm going to come back down to the underside here. I always want to start on the same side of the line each time. Push my needle underneath the next stitch and pull through. Come back to underneath the line, push my needle through, and pull. It doesn't matter if you start from the top or the bottom of the line, as long as you keep it consistent. And you'll see as you begin to work across that it creates this really pretty rope-like effect. Just go all the way across like that. When you get to the end, you're just going to make a down stitch right at the end of the line, tie off a knot in the back, and you're good to go. So after the bottom row, you're going to do that same exact technique on the middle row. You're going to use all 6 strands of 936 here, and then do a back stitch. And again, you're going to take more shiny thread and do whipped back stitch. And you'll do the same thing on the top row. Your base back stitch color is going to be 6 strands of 3013 this time, and then again you'll go through with your shiny floss and make it a whipped back stitch. So those are the 3 baselines that we have here, and now we're going to move on and start to stitch everything that's in this bottom row. Okay, we're going to start with this tree here, and I'm going to fill the window in first. I'm using 3 strands of 3863. And I'm going to start by doing these little interior bars on the round window that cross over each other, and that's just going to be a straight stitch for each one. So pull all the way across and do the same from here to here. Now to fill around the window, you're going to do a back stitch. So you'll start by making one little stitch out and then come up a teensy tiny little stitch length away, following the curve of the window, and you're going to go back down through that same hole from the previous stitch. So I want to put my needle back down through this hole. And then I'll come up a tiny stitch length away and go back down through this hole. The tinier you can keep your stitch lengths, the better, because then you'll be able to work nicely around this tight circle. So continue that until you've gone all the way around the window, and then we're also going to do the swing right now with the same color. Okay, now for the swing, you're continuing with 3 strands of 3863, and you can just pull a straight stitch down for the rope that's holding up the swing. And then you'll fill in the seat of the swing with just a few horizontal satin stitches going across. So I'm going to start at the base here, and basically satin stitches, just repeated straight stitches right next to each other. So I'll make 1 stitch across, and then I'm going to come up right next to that one, back over here on this side of the swing. There we go. And I'll pull across and go down right next to my previous down stitch. Come back over here to this side. And it should just be like 3 or 4 across here. I'm just going to put 1 more right here since I didn't make this go quite far enough. There we go. All right, so we got our swing done and our window. Okay, we're going to work on the trunk next. You're going to grab 3 strands of 779, and we're going to fill this in with a back split stitch. So you can choose any side to start from. I'm going to start over here. And for back split stitch, it's very similar to back stitch. We're just going to change the spot where we make our down stitch each time. So again, you can just start with a little straight stitch going out. Like you're doing back stitch, you're going to come up a stitch length away, and then you're going to go back down, but instead of back stitch where we'd go down right here in that hole, you're going to actually split the stitches from the previous stitch and go down about midway through that stitch length. Come up a stitch length away following the tree trunk direction and split that stitch down the middle. Come up a stitch length away and split that stitch down the middle. I'm going to go all the way up to the top of the tree trunk here. Now I'm just going to work my way back down. So I'll do another column of back split stitch right next to the one that I've already filled in until I get this whole tree trunk area filled in. You're just going to want to be careful as you start to get in through here to just work around the window. So this line will kind of come all the way down here, and then I'll have a little bit that will go just to here, and then I might make a whole nother column going down here and then fill back in here, and then there will just be a little bit left to fill in right here. So you're going to get that whole tree trunk filled in, and then we'll also do the branches. Just to show you what I mean, since I got all the way to the window here and it's getting a little bit tighter up here, I'm going to go ahead and just fill in on this other side with back split stitch as well. So kind of get a couple rows until I get to the window. and that way I'll have all this filled in, and then I just need to fill in underneath the window with back split stitch, and then that little tiny space that will be left here with back split stitch as well. So I'm kind of working from both sides of the tree trunk towards the middle. I love the back split stitch here just because it gives a nice textured sort of wood grainy look, which is perfect for this little tree house. And I'll show you how to do the branches in just a second. For each of these branch lines, the center line in between all the leaves, you're going to just continue with the 3 strands of 779 and that back split stitch, but you'll just do one little line going across. So these are just going to be a little bit skinny little branches coming off of our tree trunk here. And just sort of follow that curve with your back split stitch. You could also just do regular back stitch if you wanted to for these lines. But I just like to keep that same stitch effect going all the way across. So you'll get that done for every single tree branch. Okay, to fill in the little leaves, we're going to use 4 different colors total. We're going to use 936, we're going to use 371, we're going to use 647, and we're going to use 3013. So basically all of our sort of shades of green here. I'm going to start with 371, and I'm going to grab all 6 strands. You could use your needle that has a little bit of a larger eye here, or if you can fit it through the medium-sized eye needle, that works too, either way. I like to try to get it through this size 5 medium needle if I can, just because it's a little more precise, but the larger eye needle works as well. So what I'm going to show you here is just a little bit of a sort of loop stitch variation that we're going to use for each leaf, and I'll show you out here on the end leaf just so it's really clear. I'm going to come up through the fabric at the end of the leaf, pull all the way up through, and I'm going to go back down through the fabric as if I'm just making a tiny little straight stitch that covers the length of the leaf. And I'm going to pull through, but what I want to do is maybe just not pull super tight. Like here, I'll show you. I pulled super tight, but I want to just maybe leave it a little bit loose so it sort of stands up from the fabric. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. I'm going to do it 2 times. So I'm going to come up right at the end of the leaf again in the same spot that I came up before. Be careful on that first one that you do just because that knot is going to be in the back. So you can take your non-stitching hand and sort of move the knot to the side while you put your needle through. And I'm going to go down through the exact same hole and just sort of pull loosely until I get a nice little leaf bud here. And if that's too hard, if it's hard to not pull so tight and leave it sort of loose, you could just do a couple of straight stitches right on top of each other and pull tight each time, and it's still going to make a nice leaf shape. And basically I'm going to want to fill in maybe 3 to 4 leaves on each branch. And there's no rhyme or reason, and if you didn't want to use all these colors, you could use only one green, you could use just a couple. I just like how it ends up looking when I use all of them. But I just want to kind of vary it here. So I'm just going to at random fill in a few leaves on each branch with my 6 strands of 371 here. And it does not matter which color you start with. I'll go down over here, skip a few leaves, maybe fill in this one. And I'm going to do one more. And I'm going to repeat this for each branch. So pick a few leaves to fill in on each branch with 6 strands of 371. Okay, so once you've completed as many leaves as you want with that first color, you're going to repeat that same thing with 6 strands of 936, 6 strands of 647, and then 6 strands of 3013. And you'll just pick a few more leaves on each branch to fill in each time with that same exact repeated straight stitch or mini loop stitch technique until you have all the leaves filled in completely, and then we're going to move on to our mushroom house. Okay, moving on to our mushroom house, I'm using 3 strands of 435, and I stitched in the window similarly to this one. I just used a back stitch and a straight stitch for each interior bar. And then we're going to move down here to the door, continuing with that same color, 435 and 3 strands, and we're going to satin stitch in this door vertically. And with shapes like this, I like to start with 1 stitch down the middle. So I came up at the top of the door. I'm using my thread as a sort of directional guide here, and I'm pulling it straight down. And then I'll just go ahead and make a stitch right underneath my down stitch here. And then I'm going to just fill in with satin stitch on either side. Working from the top side of the door to the baseline each time. So as you're filling in with satin stitch here, you're going to come up right next to your previous stitch, but you're going to follow the line of the door, the archway here. So this one's right next to, but it's a little bit below. And then I'm going to go straight down right opposite where I came up through the fabric. Now I'll come up right next to that stitch, but a little bit below it. You can see where my needle's coming up here. And go down right opposite that. And then I'm gonna come up through the fabric right here. And to kind of round this out, you might make this last stitch, instead of going right down at the base, you could go down just a little bit above it. Just sort of round that out. And I'll repeat that on the other side until I have the whole door stitched in. Now we're going to fill in the bottom, like the stalk of the mushroom, with 3 strands of 948 and also a back split stitch. So just how we did on the tree trunk over here, I'm going to start by kind of doing a couple rows up and down of back split stitch, and then I'll also do it on the other side, basically until I get to the window, and then that will leave me with just this part to fill in, this part to fill in, and then this part to fill in once I get these kind of like full columns done. So I'm going to start on this edge and work this back split stitch up the length of the mushroom house. Oops. So just to give you a sense of what I mean here, I filled in with back split stitch up to this side towards the window, and then I kind of went over here and filled in towards the window. So now I just need to fill in with back split stitch this area, this little teeny area, which you might even just kind of satin stitch in here. You might not even be able to fit a full 2, stitches to make the back split stitch. And then you'll come in back down here, and then you'll also go over here and just fill in this remaining space. Okay, while you have 3 strands of 948 when you finish this part of the mushroom, I'm going to give you the world's quickest little 1 wrap French knot tutorial. We're going to do a 1 wrap French knot in the middle of the doorknob. In the middle of the door to make the doorknob. So you're going to come up through the fabric right around the center of the door. You can hold your needle horizontally underneath the thread and wrap that thread around once. Loosen it up so that you can angle the needle down, and you're going to want to make your down stitch literally right next to where you came up through the fabric. Not down the same hole though, just right next to it. And then I'm going to pull that knot tight again once I get my needle angled with my non-stitching hand. I'm going to push the needle straight through that knot. I'm still holding tight with my non-stitching hand, and then I'll let go and pull. And you don't want to pull too tight because we want it to sort of rest above these satin stitches. All right, So I know that was quick. Watch that back if you need to. We're going to go ahead and fill in the top part of the mushroom now. All right, we're going to start with the little like spots on the mushroom first. You're going to fill each of these in with 3 strands of ecru, and you're going to do a satin stitch, and you're just going to kind of pick like what direction you want your satin stitch to go in. It could either move at more of a horizontal to fill each one in, or you could do it sort of vertically, or you could go at kind of an angle. It really doesn't matter either way. You just want to, I like to switch it up and vary the direction between the different spots. So on this one over here, I'm going to do a sort of angled satin stitch out towards the side here. And the way I kind of pick is I just sort of pick a center spot, kind of like how we did down here on the door frame. And then I go ahead and use that as my direction line, and I fill either side of that. So on this little spot over here, I'm going to start with that center line, and then I'm going to fill on both sides of that with my satin stitch. So these shapes are a little bit wonky, so just do your best to get them filled in. And if they're not exactly the same as they are drawn on, that's okay. I'm going to come back over here, fill in on the other side of this. So I'll show you this whole little patch, and then I'll let you fill in the rest of them on your own. Don't worry too much about if it works perfectly at the edge, because we are going to go ahead and outline the edge with a different color at the end. So I've got that one pretty nicely filled in. I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple little kind of fixer stitches here. Sort of go back over some of the ones I've already done to make this look just a little bit nicer. Oops, got a little knot in there. There we go. Okay, that one looks good. So now I'm going to move on to this one, and again, I'm just going to kind of start somewhere in the center. I like to work more at like an angle on these, so I'm just going to pull my thread across, pick a spot right underneath there to make my down stitch, and then begin to fill on either side of that. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea, and you're going to go ahead and get all of these little white patches filled in. Okay, we're going to fill in the rest of this mushroom top with 3 strands of 38/58 and a satin stitch. I would say this is the trickiest thing that we do in this hoop in terms of just like technique. So I'm going to kind of show you how I do it, but there's also options if you don't like satin stitch and you don't feel like doing satin stitch where we're working around a bunch of stuff. You could fill it in with French knots, or you could even kind of work around going in circles with a back split stitch to fill it in and go towards the center. So those are other options if you don't want to do satin stitch, but I do like the way that satin stitch looks here. So basically I'm going to start. Again, when I'm filling in kind of wonky shapes, I tend to like to start sort of with one center line that's going to give me a direction, and then I'm going to fill in around it. So I'm coming up right next to this little patch right here, and I'm going to angle my thread across the mushroom top, and I'm going to go kind of as close as I can to this edge all the way until it hits this patch, and I'm going to go ahead and make a down stitch. then what this sort of allows you to do is to begin to sort of just fill in on either side of that line, and it gives you a nice starter direction. So I'm going to come up next to my first stitch here, and let me see if I can show you. I think I can fit one more going across before I would run into this patch right here. I went up through my knot, but that's okay because we can fix that later. And then I'll pull across. Now, since I have this patch in my way, I'm just gonna, as if I was coloring in, right? I'm just gonna go ahead and start filling in satin stitch through here, and then I'll come back down here and fill in satin stitch. So I'm gonna work around this upper part first. And it's okay if there's a little bit of space, because once you pull up again, it should tighten those next to each other. So I'm filling in all around here with these satin stitches. Just trying to keep that direction as consistent as I can. Now that I've sort of got that area filled in, I'll fill in underneath the patch. So I'm going to kind of work from right here to as far as I can go over. Come up right next to that. So it really helps me in my mind to think about like a coloring book and how you would just color around things. Picture your stitches like the mark of your pencil or of your marker. Again, if you're doing this and you're like, whoa, no, no thank you, then you can take these stitches out and you could try some tiny, some 1-wrap French knots, 1 or 2 wrap French knots to surround and fill in a cluster. Or you could fill in with a back split stitch. If that's easier for you, because this can just be a little bit tricky. So again, I'm about to run into this patch, so now I will just fill in this area right here, this tiny little area. And then I will come back up here and I will fill in this area until I've got this sort of half done, and then I'm going to continue by working across on the other side until I have this whole thing filled in. So I'm going to leave you there with that. Hopefully that can get you through filling in this mushroom, or you have options to do a different kind of filler stitch if you wish. And then we have a couple more things to do on our little mushroom house before we move on. All right, so now we're going to stitch in the little garland lines on these kind of like twinkle lights that are hanging down. So I'm going to start on this one, and you're going to use 2 strands of 3861, and you're just going to do a back stitch for each line. Nice and simple, keeping my stitch lengths pretty short here, just since these lines kind of curve this way and that. So go ahead and do that for all 4 hanging garlands, and then I will show you how to add the beads. Okay, let's add the beads. The first thing you want to do is find some sort of shallow dish to pour all of your beads into. This is obviously kind of a fancy one, but you could use a bottle cap, a little mini bowl, a paper plate, anything that just sort of has a shallow edge to it so they stay in, but that you can easily like dip your needle into them. Then I'm using just one strand of 3861 and my tiny-eyed beading needle. It can be quite tricky to get the thread through this needle. Sometimes I get it right away, sometimes it takes me like 15 tries. Just kind of depends. But just be sure to kind of wet the end of the thread with your mouth and just try to push it through that hole, because this is the only one that will really fit through the beads. So what you're going to do is I'm going to start on the bottom one right here, and you want to kind of pick, I'm going to come up towards the bottom of this little dot and pull all the way through. Make sure that you tie your knot off big enough in the back that it doesn't slip through the fabric. So you might have to do it 3 or 4 times to get the knot on the back big enough. Then I'm going to grab one of the rose gold beads with my needle and push it down towards the fabric. And all you have to do to anchor it into place is just make a down stitch about the width of that bead over, which is generally about how big these dots are. So I'm just going to make a down stitch on the other side of this dot and pull, and you'll see that your bead nestles right into place. Now on these side ones, I'm going to come up right where the garland is, grab a bead. I'm using rose gold here. I always like to use the rose gold ones in this pattern for whenever we're doing kind of like a twinkle light sort of thing. And again, I'm going to push my needle down right on the other side of that dot, and that will anchor your bead right into place. Last one right here. Okay, so you're going to repeat that on all of the other dots, and then we're done with our mushroom. Actually, no, we have one more thing to do on our mushroom house before we move on. Okay, the last thing you're going to do is take all 6 strands of 353 and just backstitch around the entire top of the mushroom. This just gives it a nice little border, and I like the look of it. You could skip this if you wanted to. If you like the way it looks without it, then feel free to move on to the next step. But I like to add in a nice little edge. We get a little variation with color here. So just work right up against your stitches. It also is going to help in case anything's a little bit wonky with where you ended your satin stitches. It'll help sort of keep those in place and just give it a nice definition. So go ahead and do that all the way around, and you can go right on back to where you started, or you could kind of just stop right here if you wanted the border to end right here. I'm going to go all the way around back to here. Okay, let's fill in these little flowers right here. You're going to grab 3 strands of 936, and you'll do a straight stitch for each stem up to where the dot is. I like to add a couple little leaves coming off the side with just a tiny little straight stitch. And if you wanted them to be a little bit more thick, you could repeat that straight stitch. Or you could just do it once, either way. Just making some tiny little leaf buds here. Just 2 on each side. Sorry, 1 on each side, 2 per flower. So go ahead and repeat that for all others. Okay, so for the flowers, this is how I like to do it. I'm using 1 strand of ecru and my little beading needle. And I'm going to grab, on this flower, I'm going to do the darker pink beads, and I'm going to start by just grabbing one of them, and I'll go ahead and kind of just anchor that bead into place. I'm going to kind of go off towards the side though a little bit. And then I'm going to come back up through the fabric sort of right next to that, or just, yeah, just right next to that. And now I'm going to get 2 of those darker pink beads together. So I have 2, let me see if I can show you. I have 2 of them on my needle. I'm going to pull those down, and I'm just going to sort of use my thread to pull up here, and I just kind of want them to sit a little bit next to that first one, and once I see where they're going to end, I'm just going to make a down stitch with my needle so that I have a little cluster of beads here. I'm going to do the same thing on this next flower, but this time I'm going to use the lighter pale pink color. And really, you could do whatever colors you want here. So I'm going to kind of do this one towards the side. And then I'll come up right at that same spot, grab 2 of them this time. Bring them down to the fabric, sort of lay them, sorry, my camera's shaking, lay them down flat. Use my needle to sort of push them into place, and once I have them kind of in place, I'll just make a down stitch, and there you go. You could also just use 1 bead per flower. So on this one, I'm going to do the darker pink, brighter pink again, and on that last one, I'll do the pale pink. Once you get that done, we're going to move on to the teacup house. All right, you're going to fill in the windows here with 3 strands of 3863, the same exact way we filled in this window over here. So just backstitch around the windows and a couple little straight stitches across the interior. And then same thing with the door. Continue with 3 strands of 3863 and do a vertical satin stitch just like we did for this door over here. Don't need to worry about the doorknob quite yet. We'll do that in a moment. You're going to take 3 strands of 647 and you're going to horizontally satin stitch in the teacup starting underneath this little band. There we go. I'm going to come up through the fabric, pull all the way across here, and go right back down. Then I'll come back over to this side. And pull all the way across here. Go until you get to the windows, and then again, just like we're coloring, you're going to fill in around this window, in between these 2, around this window, and then once you get to the bottom of the windows, you can start pulling straight across again until you get to the door, and then you'll need to fill in this side of the door and then fill in this side of the door. Once you finish with that, you're also going to add a little 1 wrap French knot. Again, we're just using the 3 strands of 647 for that, right in the middle of the door. All right, you can tie that off. Now we're going to outline it in gold. So I have a strand of my shiny gold thread here, and I'm going to start by outlining the teacup with it and a back stitch. Just kind of how we did to the mushroom, but we're using our shiny diamond thread. So I'm going to start on the bottom here and work my way up to here. I went across the top here once, and I'm actually just going to double that up to sort of fill in this thicker band that we want at the top of the teacup. So I'm just going to make another row of backstitch right next to the one that I already made on the top. Oh, that stitch was a little bit far away. That's a little better. So I'll go all the way back across here and do this so that I have backstitch, 2 rows of backstitch across the top. And then you'll continue and go ahead and fill down across this border. Lastly, for the handle, you're also just going to backstitch the handle in with that shiny gold thread. I'm starting on the sort of outer line of the handle, and then I'm going to do another line of backstitch on the interior here. And if you run out of gold thread, you're just going to tie off in the back and go ahead and get some more. So kind of how we did on the top here, you'll just sort of have two kind of rows of backstitch right next to each other to fill in the handle on the teacup. So now that I got that done, I'm going to continue, make another row of that on the interior here. Oops, sorry, I got kind of low down. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea. Once we're all done with that, we're gonna go up here and do our flowers. Okay, let's start with this little leaf stem right here. You're gonna use 3 strands of 30-13, and you will start by just doing a back stitch up the center stem. All right, then for each little leaf, we're gonna do kind of that same thing we did down here, or actually similar to what we did on these leaves over here, but we're just using the 3 strands still instead of 6. So I'm going to come up at the tip of the leaf, go towards the stem, and pull it down. And then I'm just gonna repeat that. So I'm gonna go right up back to that same spot at the tip of the leaf, go in the same down stitch hole and pull that right on top of it, just so that it has a little bit more definition to it. And I'll repeat that for each little leaf. Remember, you can pull ever so slightly and not too tight as you come down, just until it kind of hits so that it sort of rests above the fabric. And just repeat that for all of the leaves on this stem. Then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, to fill in these circles, you have 2 options. You could do the same bead technique that we did for these, so kind of cluster in 3 beads per circle, or you could do what I'm going to do, which is a cluster of 1 wrap French knots. I'm using 3 strands of 353, and I'm just going to fit a few 1 wrap French knots kind of into that circular area. Just gives it a little fluffy floral effect. So I'll do that on this one, and then I'll come over here and do that on this circle as well. Okay, for the next stem, again, you're just going to do a back stitch, and I'm using 3 strands of 936. Once you get to the top, I'll show you how to fill in each leaf. What we're going to do is like a modified satin leaf stitch. So you're going to come up through the fabric at the very tip of the leaf. These are very small, so it's not going to be too many stitches. I'm going to go back down that center line of the leaf almost towards the stem, like 2/3 of the way down the length of the center of the leaf. Then I'm going to choose a side, and I'm going to come up right next to and below our first stitching spot, and I'm going to go back down through the center of the leaf, but underneath my first down stitch. And I will repeat that on the other side now. I'm going to come up next to and below the tip of the leaf. And I'm going to make my down stitch in that center line underneath the previous down stitch. If you want it to be a little bit fuller, you could do that maybe one more time on each side. But basically, whenever you feel like you get the leaf shape that you want, you can move on to the next leaf. So it should look something like that when you're all done. Go ahead and repeat that for all the other leaves. All right, let's do these flower petals. We're going to be doing a lazy daisy stitch here, and we're going to be using 3 strands of 223. So I'm going to start with this petal over here and show you how to do a lazy daisy. You're going to come up through the fabric, and you're going to go right back down that same hole. Now on this first one, since there's going to be a knot in the back where you're trying to make your needle go down through, you can take your non-stitching hand from underneath and kind of just pull that knot a little bit to the side, and then carefully angle your needle back down through the exact same hole you just came up through. Pull, and you're going to leave a loop out like this around the petal that we're filling in. Then you're going to come up on the inside of that loop like so. And then you're going to pull gently, and you'll see this starts to create a little loop. Once you have the shape that you want, if you pull super, super tight, it's going to turn into more of a straight line. So right when you get it at that petal shape that you want, you're going to anchor this down by making a down stitch right on the other side of the thread. So right now you can see my thread is coming up on the inside of that loop, and I'm going to want to make a down stitch right on the other side of the loop and pull, and that will anchor it into place. You're going to go ahead and repeat that for each petal. And then right in the center of this flower, you're going to take 3 strands of 435 and just make a little 2-wrap French knot. So for 2 wraps, you're just going to put your needle underneath the thread, wrap it around 2 times, angle the needle down right next to where you came up through the fabric, right in the center of that flower, and then pull through. One thing I like to do is grab 3 strands of 3013 and just fill in a few 1-wrap French knots along the top of the teacup here to give the illusion of maybe like a little moss or grass kind of growing out where all these flowers are. You can sort of build up your clusters in places. Also just kind of helps to fill in this empty negative space that we have here. So there's really no right or wrong. You could leave this out if you wanted to skip this part and just keep going on. But I think it looks nice to add a few. So anyways, I would just continue that. I've got a couple over here, filling in through here, and then I'll continue all the way across and kind of let a couple spill off the side here. All right, we are moving on up to the middle row here. There is a lot of detail here, so let's get started. I'm starting with the A-frame little house right here. I like to do the flowers after. And we just started with 3 strands of ecru and a vertical satin stitch to fill in the door. Didn't show that on the video just because it's the same way we did this door right here and this door as well. So go ahead and get that done. And then you're going to grab 3 strands of 3863, and we're also going to satin stitch in vertically each of these stripes. So starting with this tiny one over here, I'm going to just vertically satin stitch this in. And you'll do every other one with this color. So once I get done with this one, I will also skip this one. I'm going to fill this one in, and I'm going to fill this one in. Then you're going to repeat that. You're going to use 3 strands of 948 to vertically satin stitch in the remaining stripes. So that would be this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, so now we're going to do a couple things with 4 strands of 779. I'm going to start by just doing a little 1 wrap French knot in the center of this door to make a doorknob. And then I also like to just add in 1 straight stitch in between each stripe. So you want to make your stitch going out right basically in the center of wherever your 2 colors ended up meeting up. And then you're just going to make your down stitch right down that line. So you can even kind of like take your needle and trace it down through there and pull. And you're going to repeat that in between all the stripes. So go ahead and get that done in between each stripe. The very last thing I like to do on this A-frame is just give it a little bit of shine by using a strand of our gold floss and back stitching the outline. So I'll just back stitch up the triangle and then down the other side of the triangle, and then we're going to move on to our flowers. Okay, next we're going to do the stems of these flowers and also the leaves. So I'm going to show you on this one just because it's a little bit farther away from my stand, but you'll do the same thing on this little one over here. I'm using 3 strands of 3013, and we're just going to do a simple back stitch for the center stem running up the length of each flower. But while we're doing that, we're also going to fill in these leaves since we're right here. So once you get past a leaf with your back stitch, oops, you can then fill in that leaf. So I'm going to do this leaf right here first, and it's just going to be a lazy daisy stitch, just like we did on this flower down here. So you're going to come up through the fabric, you're going to make a down stitch through that same hole, leave a loop out, come up on the inside of that loop, pull, and then make a down stitch on the other side of the loop. We'll go ahead and do this one right now as well. So you're going to do that all the way up to the top of the flower. Okay, so just to show you it all done, I did this stem all the way up with back stitch, lazy daisies for each little leaf coming off. Make sure you get these side flowers, and then you're also going to continue your back stitch across the garland with the flowers going all the way to our tower. Once you have that all that done, can't speak. Once you have all of that done, we can do the flower petals next. Okay, so your next step after you've gotten the stems and the little leaves done is to do lazy daisy stitches for all of these flowers. So the big ones at the top of the tall flowers are going to be 3 strands of 223 and a lazy daisy stitch. So if you need to remember how to do that, we give a little tutorial back here in row 1, same exact stitch technique. And then you'll also do this flower and this flower on the top of the garland here. And then these smaller flowers off to the side and these 2 right here are going to be 3 strands of 948, I believe, 948, yeah. And you're going to make that lazy daisy stitch over each flower petal. So once you get that all done, we'll continue on and I'll show you how to make the little center points of these flowers. Okay, so take 3 strands of 435 and we're going to do a 2-wrap French knot at the top of these 3 petals. Sorry, I don't mean to make that shaking. And also at the center of the darker pink ones up here. Just be careful not to come through one of your lazy daisy stitches too much. Okay, I'm running through the back of the fabric because of where this is, so let me just fix that. Okay, so another 2-wrap French knot. And you'll repeat that for this flower and this flower. You can do it also on these ones on the garland, but I just like to leave those. So I really only do it for this one, this one, this one, and this one. To fill in this garland right here, you're just going to use 2 strands of 3861 and a back stitch. So you'll just go from here to here and then from here to here. Okay, so now we're going to add one of our rose gold beads to each dot here, and don't forget about this dot, this dot, this dot, and this dot. So I'll just show you starting, I'm going to start over on this side just because it's a little easier to show on the camera, but again, we'll also do all of these beads the same way. You can come up just to the right of the dot or to the left of it, whatever's more comfortable. And you're going to grab your beads. So I got my bead here, I'm going to push it down towards the fabric and I'm going to make a down stitch just on the other side of that dot. I don't think I said it yet, but I'm just using 1 strand of that 3861 color, but you could use 1 strand of whatever lightish color thread you have lying around. And you'll just do that for each dot. Okay, for our little flowers down here, we're going to do them the exact same way we did these ones down here. I'm starting with 3 strands of 936 to make a straight stitch for each stem. And then I'm just going to do a little repeated straight stitch off the side of each stem for the leaves. And you'll do that for each other flower that we see here. And then we will add in a little bit more beading work here. So something like that. Okay, and then we're gonna do the flowers also the same way that we did these down here, but I'm gonna do all blue here just because I like the way that the little pop of blue looks on this row in particular. So I'm coming up through the fabric just to remind you, and I'm going to first just place 1 blue bead, and I kind of like to go off to the side a little bit. Oops, I went way too far on that one. Sorry, y'all. Let me try that again. Let's move that bead into place, then make my down stitch right there. Okay, cool. Now we're going to come back up towards the base of where this flower starts, and I'm going to grab 2 blue beads this time onto my needle. 2. Press them down, kind of wrap them around that first bead, or you could even just kind of put them straight up. Push your needle, push the beads with your needle, and then once you get them sort of flat and against the fabric, you can just go ahead and push the needle through to anchor those into place. Repeat that for every other flower with the blue. Of course, if you want to do different colors here, do whatever colors speak to your soul.